Last month, I shared a mother's experience as my older daughter graduated from college and was leaving home to live on her own. This month, I opened the Life Memory Vault once again and share my life ventures with my two dads. Many will relate to the thoughts and feelings as they did with the poem Mother to Daughter. I hope today's sharing will open hurting hearts and in the process allow the healing hand of God to remove the hurt and pain and restore love, life, and happiness. Today's writing is entitled My Two Dads. My biological father entered my life and left when I was too young to know who he was. My older sisters and brothers would talk about him, and my mother would casually mention his name whenever my younger brother walked or held his head just like my father. But I didn't know who he was and could only imagine what an adult-sized version of my 2-year-old brother would look like. I was 4 years old, and from that time until I was 14, I would long for, pretend, and wonder who was my biological father. I was the 5th child of 6 children in a very loving but also very poor family. My mother said my father went looking for work up north, and we left the South to go live with him. We stayed there for a little more than a year until he lost his job. Things got bad, and we moved back down south. However, my father remained and did not come back with us. So this is where the bits and pieces of my adult memory begin. I will forever cling to my first childhood addresses down south. My mother met another man when we lived on First Street. My older sister remembers telling him, "I wish you were my daddy." Well, he eventually did become our stepfather, and I have rued those days as the years living with him were filled with tremendous trepidation and awkward ambivalence. He ruled with a firm hand, yelled and cussed a lot, and gave orders to my mom to keep us in line. He was an avid believer that children should be seen and not heard. Oh, well, don't get me wrong. He wasn't all bad. He was a good provider and did not seem to mind the fact that there were 6 mouths to feed and hold and clothe that did not belong to him. When he was good, he was good. But when he got angry, he was really angry and would storm through that entire 3-room shotgun house. We all would run to the back and sit quietly until we heard Mom crying or until we knew that he was gone. They fought both verbally and physically. And to this day, I tremble inside when men get loud or shout, whether they are fussing or just simply having a lot of fun. Needless to say, the union did not last, and we were alone again. As each of my older sisters and brothers graduated from high school, they went up north to live with my real father, quote unquote. Finally, there was only my younger brother and I left at home with my mother. So the 3 of us, along with my grandfather, boarded the Illinois Central passenger train and headed for Chicago with a changeover bound for the Northeast. The train's monotonous clickety-clack, clickety-clickety, clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-click, clickety-clickety, clickety-clack, numbed my posterior and also my mind as I enacted the dreaded meeting with my biological father. The years, void of visits, letters, phone calls, and hugs, had taken their toll. The only thing he could do for me now was to answer one question. Why? He was thin, lightly tanned, with soft, curly hair. He was quiet and very assuming, but with a strong presence that let you know he was there. He had no way of knowing that the years had left me hurt, angry, and bitter. He stood there motionless as I looked him up from head to toe, and then conspicuously turned and walked away. I had nothing to say to him, and I wanted him to have nothing to do with me. Yet I yearned to know the truth, for I so desperately needed that truth to fill the gap and ease the pain of not belonging and not knowing who was my real father. My mind raced back to those days when I was cajoled into believing my stepfather was my real dad because we were the same hue. Little did I know as a child that Black people come in all different shades. So the teen mind had to compensate for the thoughts and feelings the child did not understand. And seeing my biological father for the first time did absolutely nothing to allay those fears, to solidify an answer, or to remove that gnawing ambivalence. There were times when my stepfather was gruff, and there were times when he was gentle, but he was there, and he provided for my mother and me and my sisters and brothers. I would feel secure and call him daddy and wanted to be his little girl. But the cussing and the fighting far outweighed the good times, and I would wish to God that he was not my father. Therefore, seeing and meeting my real father became a source of increased anxiety and frustration for a young girl barely in her teens. Time passed, and the more I struggled to distance myself from my biological father, it seemed the more he and my mom were getting closer. They were rejoined in matrimony, and we moved in together again. However, I remained obstinate in my revenge for the absent years and the seemingly lack of love and caring. Whenever he would enter the room, I would leave. When we sat down to eat, if he was there, I suddenly lost my appetite. One day, though, I did ask him why. His only response was to quietly say, "When you grow up and get married, you will understand." Well, that was no answer. I needed more. I needed much more than that. But that was all he ever said in words. People say that actions speak louder than words, and that was exactly what my father did. He worked every day, and I never heard him complain about the time or the work. He would give his entire check to my mother, and the house would be filled with food, fun, and laughter. His spare time was spent sitting in his favorite chair, reading the National Geographic, Field and Stream, or antique auto magazines. He loved to fish and would quietly paint, his favorite pastime. He was a self-taught man who only finished the 4th grade, but he could discuss politics, nature, cars, and life with just about anyone. Every night, you would find him kneeling beside his bed, engrossed in his prayers. Sometimes he would be there for hours, and I often wondered if perhaps he might be asleep. He never shouted or raised his voice in anger, but we knew not to cross him or disturb his books. Well, I did grow up, got married, and yes, I did understand. Nobody knows what goes on behind closed doors. And it's amazing what God can do for a hurting heart when you hold it up for him to heal. Through a lopsided divorce, I was forced to walk in my mother and my father's shoes. I experienced firsthand the effect wrong choices have on life's events. Finances eventually forced me to return home. But shortly before I moved in with my parents, I received a graduation picture from my first cousin, my father's niece. She looked like my twin, only younger. It was not until this point that I was certain who was my biological father. In the days to come, while living with my parents, I saw my father do twice for each of my girls what he didn't do for me, and my heart melted. He was so patient, so kind, so loving in his care for each one of them. So much so that when he passed, my older daughter said, "I don't know who I am since Granddaddy died." Someone wrote that we pass this way but once, and I am so grateful that God allowed him to pass through my life again and fragrance it with the calm and peaceful spirit of the quiet, gentle man. I am who I am today, not only because of the genes inherited from my biological father, but also because of the inculcated experiences with my other dad. They each made an indelible imprint on my heart, my mind, and my life. There are times when I am stern, unbending, and firm, just like my stepfather. But then there are other times when I'm soft-spoken, submissive, and reticent, almost to a fault, as in my marriage. But I have no regrets as I look back over my childhood. But there is, however, a much more insightful understanding as I acknowledge the fact that I am who I am because of my mother's love and the experiences I had with both my dads. They each loved me in their own way, and I have become the adult person who has come to appreciate and deeply love my two dads. Happy Father's Day. Asante.